Hi, this is Kelly Huang from HBS Publishing. I'm fortunate to be able to introduce to you Magdalena Yesil in this interview. Magdalena was the first investor and founding board member of Salesforce.com. In this video clip, we joined the interview already in progress to talk about humble leadership. To be a role model doesn't mean you have to be, a certain personality or somebody
unreachable,
who's
very kind of like out there in the ether. Absolutely.
Yes, and I think that's what I saw in the book. And so there are a couple of things. There are three themes that I saw. I'm first starting with, I love the analogy of flow and water, because water is always in balance and water is always flowing somewhere. And I was thinking more about how women, we're now being told, don't be apologizing, don't, overdo the humility, eat the humble pie piece. And from your book, it also talks about how you had this, I'm not going to apologize for everything, right? So there is a tension there in terms of humility, of course, is a strength that we have, but also we don't have to apologize for everything. So I want to ask you about how do you, again, manage that?
How do you balance that? Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, it's true. There's a term that I use in the book, humbilicious.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah.
Humbilicious is a combination of humble and ambitious.
Yes.
And in fact, research, this is, probably a 30 year ago, where the scientists were working at Bell Labs and looking at all the different characteristics of different successful people within the Bell Labs environment. Most of them at the time, researchers, scientists. And they realized that one of the most common traits was in those leaders who were successful was this combination of being humble and yet being ambitious at the same time.
Right.
So, because no one really wants to be led by someone who is a little too full of themselves, who's like so incredibly, entitled to everything, including their own success. There is something that is much more approachable in leaders when they're humble. That doesn't necessarily mean, humble doesn't mean apologetic.
Yes.
And that's a big difference. And so when you say, how do you balance those? I want to really contrast the two. Humble is somebody who really is grateful and doesn't have high expectations of what the world owes to them, right? You are humble because you believe that the world doesn't owe you anything. And so when you get breaks, you're very thankful for them.
Yes.
You're very excited about them. And yet you're still ambitious, meaning you're going to drive yourself as hard as you possibly can to get the best results, to get the most success under your belt. So it's really that combination that I think makes very successful leaders.
Right.
And it is totally different than apologizing or not taking credit. And that's one of the areas that I talk about in the book is, in fact, you've got to take credit for what you do.
Yes.
And that's something that I feel I had to learn over the years. Humble doesn't necessarily mean you don't take credit for what you do. Right? So that is, again, a very important piece, while being humble, to also say what the reality is. The reality is, I was the first investor and founding board member of Salesforce. For years, I didn't say that because I just felt like it was like boasting. And I shouldn't be boasting. But in fact, no, it's not boasting. It's stating the truth.
Yes.
Stating the fact. And I don't necessarily need to have other people say it. I mean, when they do, it's great. And when Mark Benioff says it, it feels good. But it's also totally okay for me to say it. So there you go.